at the Cumberland River Compact. We do lots of different work throughout all of Middle Tennessee and parts of Kentucky. All of our work is focused around the Cumberland River watershed. And the Cumberland River actually starts up in way up in the eastern Kentucky in Harlan, Kentucky, and flows down through Big South Fork, down through Nashville, passes through Clarksville, and ends up kind of spilling out into the Ohio River in western Kentucky as well. So the river itself is around 690 miles long, and it encompasses this entire area you see here is the Cumberland River watershed. It's about 18,000 square miles, pretty large area, and it serves a population of around 3 million people who depend on that area for clean water and for recreation as well. So we try to do lots of work throughout the entire watershed here. Maybe you've seen some of the stuff we have, maybe you're just now getting acquainted with us. But hopefully you will be able to work with us in the future, because we're always trying to help people do some good practices from home. Some of you may be wondering, what is a watershed? Gray, I've never heard of a watershed before. Watershed, it's a pretty easy concept once you think of it. It's an area of land that just sheds water off. A watershed's an area of land that drains all of the precipitation that falls on it and all of its streams to a common outlet, such as an outflow of a reservoir, mouth of a bay, or any point along a stream channel. And even if you don't live next to a stream or river, if you're within that watershed, what you do on your lawn or in your woods or something like that can potentially affect people downstream from you. So that's why we're always trying to do lots of education to teach people about their watershed and how they can have a positive impact rather than a negative impact. And you may say, but wait, Gray, you know, I don't dump a lot of things into the river. I don't try to do any negative things. I'm a good steward of my land. And that's true. A lot of us are trying to do good things every single day. But the problem is, because we all live within this watershed, we all impact each other. And there's a lot of things that we do that actually negatively impact the river that you may not know about. And so we're going to kind of talk about pollution just for a little bit, and the different types that we see before we kind of jump in on how you can do things at home to mitigate the impact that you're having on other people. So we're going to talk about two different types of pollution, and the first one we're going to talk about is point source pollution. It's pretty straightforward. A point source type of pollution is pollution that you can easily point at. It's typically what you think of when you think of factory pipes and outfalls. The term point source, the actual definition is any discernible, confined conveyance from which pollutants or effluent is discharged. And this can also include some things like from boats and as well. But it's basically, if you can identify where it's coming from, you can kind of identify who's releasing it. It's a point source type of pollutant. And it's pretty easy to determine who's responsible for these types of pollution. I say easy, it's easier than the other type we're going to talk about. But we do a pretty good job of regulating point source pollutants in the US. That we require monitoring at any type of pollutant source. We require that people don't exceed total maximum daily discharges of pollutants from their point source pollutant sources. And if they do violate anything, the EPA has a lot of, they can kind of impose some civil or criminal penalties on them, whether they be legal or financial as well. And so over the years, we've been doing a pretty good job at kind of dealing with point source pollution. It started back with Clean Water Act of 1972. Prior to that, we had some regulation, but it was pretty difficult to control because there wasn't a lot of I'm losing my words here. Before then, it was kind of left up to states to kind of deal with some of this stuff. And the federal government didn't have a lot of control to kind of step in. But then once 1972 came around, there was a lot of concern about environmentalism. a big news story that happened around the time was the Cuyahoga River fire, which kind of spurred and inspired Congress to resolve the issue of a lot of water and land pollution, not just in Cleveland, but throughout the entire United States. And they created a regulatory system to kind of identify where these point source pollutions are coming from and to hold people accountable for what they're kind of dumping in the stream. And so, well, if we're doing okay regulating point source pollution, why are rivers still suffering from pollution today? Well, the problem is we also have a non-point source pollution. Non-point source pollution represents the most significant source of pollution overall in the country. It doesn't really come from a single source. It actually comes from a diffuse number of sources. And it can generally result from stormwater runoff, precipitation, atmospheric deposition, and drainage and seepage from hydrologic kind of modification. And out of the many different types of non-point source pollution that there is, stormwater runoff is actually one that we focus a lot of our attention to. So runoff is that water that kind of flows over the land during and after a precipitation event. And there is some regulation on this from the federal side of things, but it's very difficult to figure out where this pollution is coming from and who's responsible for it. Because if you imagine if I do something accidentally on my lawn, or my neighbor 10 miles away does something accidentally on his lawn, maybe over fertilizes his lawn before a heavy rain. The person in Clarksville could do the same thing. After a rain event, all that's going to end up being washed into a local stream or river. And once it's in that stream, it's going to be very difficult to figure out how all of that ended up in the river. So it's very difficult to regulate. Stormwater travels across tons of property lines in municipalities and other jurisdictions. And so there is some regulation on it. And I know like the city of Nashville has stormwater management programs and does a lot of education. But in general, it's kind of up to you and me to kind of figure out how we can mitigate our impact on the rivers. But a lot of you may ask, so why is stormwater bad? I thought it was natural, and stormwater is natural. And you think about it, over the past hundreds of thousands of years, whenever you have a rain event, you're going to have stormwater runoff kind of flowing through the landscape and carrying things to our rivers and streams. But the problem is, as humans have developed and changed the landscape, it's become more problematic and unnatural how it affects the environment. So we're going to talk a little bit how we change stormwater and what types of pollutants are being kind of now added to the stream as a result of all this. But before we do that, I'm going to go over just a couple of terms. So one that we use a lot in the industry when we're talking about stormwater runoff is impervious surfaces, or also known as impermeable surfaces. Impervious surfaces are what are also known as permeable. So an impervious surface basically means a liquid cannot pass through it. So when it rains, if that rainwater hits an impervious surface like a road, a roof, or a parking lot, it's not going to be allowed to soak naturally into the soil, into the groundwater table. Whereas a pervious surface is one that allows that water to soak through. So you may see around Nashville, we have some parking lots that are made out of pervious concrete, as you can see down here. Has a lot of voids in it. It'll allow that water to soak through the ground. There's also pavers that people put together, like little bricks that they'll make their driveways out of, and they won't cement them together so the water can kind of flow through the cracks and soak into the ground. So there's a couple terms that we use quite a bit. So if I use those a lot throughout this presentation, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. And as you guessed it, a lot of our stormwater problems are the result of development in impervious surfaces. So when it rains, instead of infiltrating or soaking into the ground, water is going to hit our impervious surfaces and it's going to go straight to the storm drain. And kind of depending on what the system the city has, a lot of storm drains don't go into a water treatment plant, they go to a local stream or river. And so that means, talking about that fertilizer that I may have accidentally left out on my lawn that got rained on and washed into the storm drain, that means it's going to go straight to the river instead of through a water treatment plant. And a lot of people, you may ask, well, can we avoid this? Why do we have to have this all go straight into the river? Well, when we end up converting an area that would normally be forest land and like a natural environment to a very suburban and urban area that's paved over, you're going to have to deal with all that storm water that runs off the land. Because as an area gets developed with houses and streets and office buildings, you're increasing that stormwater runoff and reducing the infiltration in that area. And this is a really nice little diagram right here that kind of shows how conversion of a native area to a more urban or suburban kind of environment will impact how that water travels in the environment to our streams. So in a natural system, most water is either infiltrated into the shallow or the deeper parts of the soil. They'll recharge the groundwater. And a lot of it will undergo what's called a Vapo Transpiration, which is basically a combined term to include evaporation and transpiration. I'm sure everybody knows what evaporation is, and if you don't know what transpiration is, it's basically the process in which plants release water through trying to either cycle water and nutrients throughout their system, and also to release carbon dioxide or to utilize carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. And so plants can actually release quite a bit of water vapor into the air, and a lot of that water, very little of that water ends up as stormwater runoff. But as you notice, as you kind of see this diagram, as we kind of move through and put down more roads, put down more roofs, put down more parking lots for people to park at Walmart, you're going to effectively reduce that infiltration substantially. You're also going to reduce that evapotranspiration because water is no longer very slowly moving over the land and being evaporated, and it's not being used up by plants and transpirated into the air anymore. Now it's mostly being turned into runoff, which is going to end up in our streams. And it also really modifies how quickly water is being discharged into our streams. Over here, I've got a hydrograph, which kind of shows how much water gets discharged into a stream over time. And in most urban systems, whenever you have a rain event, you'll kind of see a lot of water being introduced into these streams over a very short amount of time, versus either more rural or more natural environments where water is very slowly kind of released into a stream as it's kind of slowed down by plant material, and as it's able to soak into the groundwater and kind of slowly recharge streams that way. So one of the areas a lot of the stormwater issues come from is from all this impervious surface that we're introducing in what would normally be a natural system that would absorb a lot of the stormwater. And it's also just because we're reducing the native vegetative cover. We have a loss of forests and wetlands and other native ecosystems and converting it to all these impervious surfaces. And you're reducing all of that evapotranspiration that I was talking about earlier. But in addition, you're also removing a lot of trees that utilize a lot of water and kind of pull it from the ground. And you're also removing all of the root systems that would normally break up that soil and kind of allow everything to infiltrate more. So when you think about plants, when we're talking about native plants and native ecosystems, we have these very extensive root systems that can be meters deep, can break up the soil and create more pores for water to soak into that groundwater table. But when you think about kind of urban environments, you see a lot more turf. And the issue with turf is turf grasses don't have really extensive root systems. And you can kind of see in this diagram right here, these are all native plants over at the right. And then over at the very left, you'll see a very common turf plant, Kentucky bluegrass, which is not from Kentucky. And its root system is nowhere near as deep. It's typically only a few inches deep. And so when you compact soil down, when you're constructing a house and you completely rip out all of the normal soil that would be there and kind of introducing not as great tops or clay soils and just fill dirt and then putting Kentucky bluegrass sod on top of it, all of a sudden you've lost a lot of your pore spaces and ability to infiltrate your water underneath your yards and turf. And so another reason why excess stormwater is such an issue is there's kind of two things that really come to mind. Is one, once you introduce all this water into a stream, if you remember that hydrograph I was kind of talking about, you imagine taking 10 areas of forest, converting it to asphalt. All of a sudden, you've got about 270,000 gallons of water entering a storm drain during a single 1-inch rain event, compared to a significantly less, because most of it's being infiltrated in the native system. So if you take a huge amount of stormwater like that and put it in a stream that's not normally kind of, that wouldn't normally accept that much water, you have a lot of what's called scouring of the edges of streams. And so this right here, this picture over here on the top right, you can see is a picture of Mansker Creek up in Goodlettsville. What was happening is, because of all the development in Goodlettsville, this Mansker Creek was not able to really handle all the excess stormwater that was being introduced into the stream. And it started eating away at this bank over here, and that's right next to Moss Wright Park. And the park was losing tons of land to this. And we worked with the park system to kind of later on repair this bank and kind of pull it back, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I think. But this is very common through a lot of urban areas. So it can remove land from stream banks, and it can also introduce a lot of sediment into the stream. And then that can also, the other issue that comes from like excessive stormwater is it causes a lot of flooding. So that 270,000 gallons of water over a 10-acre area that I was talking about, yes, you pipe it and you get it quickly off the land so you don't have flooding in that immediate area. But as soon as you take all that water and put it down a storm drain and put it downstream, all of a sudden all the folks downstream have a lot of stormwater to deal with, which can be an issue, because it means that they're going to have to implement infrastructure to kind of handle that as well. Otherwise, they will have lots of erosion, and they will have to be dealing with these huge excessive water during rain events. So we're going to talk a little bit about some common pollutants that we have in the Cumberland River Basin. And there's a lot more that I'm not going to talk about. I'll briefly mention them, but we have three main big ones that we're concerned with, and it's usually not what people typically consider when you think of pollution. And the number one on the list is sediment. And so why is sediment an issue? Some sediment's actually pretty natural in a stream, and because the stream's constantly kind of rebuilding itself and meandering, it's eroding some things and depositing some of that sediment in other areas. It's constantly changing, but too much sediment can actually be really unnatural, and it can degrade the stream quality and upset its balance. And sediment can come from a ton of diffuse sources. It's a non-source pollutant. And you think of agricultural fields, construction sites. If they don't have those silt fences properly implemented, you can have rainwater wash a lot of the upturned dirt and introduce it to a stream. Even like lawns and recreational fields, if they don't have those deep root systems holding that soil in place, you can see some erosion in like golf courses and other recreational fields like that. And all of that's going to get washed into a storm drain and introduced into the stream. And the reason why that's such an issue is it destroys habitat for what we call benthic macroinvertebrates that live in the stream substrate. So a benthic macroinvertebrate is basically an insect that lives in the bottom of a stream. Benthic means bottom. Macroinvertebrate would be a creature without a backbone that is large enough to see in your hand. You don't need a microscope to view it. So we have tons of little critters like hellgrammites and cranefly larvae, damselflies and dragonflies, all that in their larva phase live underneath the rocks and in the substrate of our streams. But as you introduce a ton of sediment into your stream, you're effectively filling out all these pore spaces and removing the home for these creatures to complete part of their life cycle. Sediment can also reduce visibility for fish in the stream, which can affect their ability to reproduce and to eat and survive. Sediment can also carry excess nutrients that can cause harm to ecosystems, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It also can affect how we have to treat our drinking water. They have to remove sediment from our drinking water by introducing chemicals to cause it to kind of what's called like flocculate and bind up and settle to the bottom so they can clean our drinking water and make it safe and up to EPA standards. So it can be more expensive if you have really high amounts of sediment in a stream. And so one of the other issues that pollutant issues that we kind of deal with in the Cumberland River Basin itself are nutrients. And again, you may say, well, Gray, I thought nutrients are natural. And yeah, some nutrients are naturally present in a stream. You imagine your leaf litter that's decomposing. You imagine all the nutrients from soil that may get added in. Middle Tennessee has a ring of really high phosphorus rock and soil that introduces a lot of higher levels of phosphorus than you typically see in other areas. And those are all natural sources of nutrients. But what we're more concerned about is excess nutrients that normally wouldn't be entering the stream. So you think about your golf courses, you think about your lawn that you're trying to keep really nice and green. Imagine agricultural fields that may not apply their fertilizer correctly, and then a big, large rain event will end up washing all of the fertilizer off of a lawn or an agricultural field or a football field or something like that. You introduce just tons, unnatural amounts of nutrients into a stream. And the thing with nitrogen and phosphorus is they're the building blocks of life. We add them to our lawns to help them grow, but it does the same thing in our streams. And the problem here is it causes algal blooms. Algae are little single-celled photosynthetic organisms, and they love all these nutrients, and they'll just go crazy, and they'll create these big scums on the surfaces of the water. And what happens is it results in something called eutrophication, where you have too much nutrients in the water, and it eats up all the oxygen. And none of the organisms that live in the water can survive without oxygen. And that's because the algae ends up dying off. It ends up getting broken down by bacteria in the stream, and the bacteria need oxygen in order to break those things down, and so they take it all from the water, and that's when you start seeing fish go belly up in your stream. And it can also be an issue for humans too. So there's things called harmful algal blooms. You'll see this, not all algae produce toxins, but some algae can produce bioneurotoxins. And that's a concern that happens when you see, especially in other areas of the world too, but in the US as well, where you'll have a very, very big algal bloom, sometimes like a teal or a red algae, and they'll produce things that can be either make you sick or they could potentially kill you as well, or at least your pets too. So that's another reason why we're always very concerned with introducing way too many nutrients into a stream, just because it can cause algae that are particularly harmful, if not for us, at least for the fish and the macroinvertebrates in the stream. And a third one that we're really concerned about are pathogens. That's one everybody's like, well, doy, yeah, pathogens, we don't want that in our water. But bacteria are present everywhere. Some pathogens are supposed to be there. They serve important services for our streams. They break stuff down. But the one that we are really concerned with, and that the EPA and that the state agencies are concerned with, are pathogens from fecal matter. So E. coli and other fecal coliforms are what they test for. And basically what can happen is they can come from a very diffuse number of sources. You can have cattle either adjacent to or next to a stream, and when it rains, it washes off E. coli from their waste, get in the stream. Same with your pets. If you don't pick up after your dog, that can actually introduce E. coli into a stream as well. You can have maybe a leaky sewer system, or you can also have a bad septic system as well. So it's always important to get your septic tanks cleaned out and to make sure it's been inspected. That way you're not contaminating everybody's drinking water. And it can cause issues with the levels of E. coli that are in the stream. So often you'll see in some other areas along beaches these no swimming advisories. And you can have that in streams too, where you have a contact advisory. The E. coli levels are too high and to be safe for recreation, so they won't allow you in the stream. It's dangerous. And we try to prevent that as often as possible, but there are some areas where throughout Tennessee that you unfortunately can't recreate in the stream. But we're also really lucky that we have a lot of areas that we can. In fact, in downtown Nashville, it's one of the few downtowns rivers that you can actually recreate in. So we're really proud of that. You can swim. You'll see kayaks going all up and down the downtown Nashville River. And So we're really happy that that is one of those few downtown rivers that are safe for recreation and for swimming. And so there's a ton of other different things too that TDEC monitors for. They publish all this on their 303D lists, many other types of issues with our streams that they're trying to keep track of and mitigate. So there may be some for heavy metals or habitat impairments. Maybe there's substrate alterations where someone changed the stream pretty significantly and doesn't support macroinvertebrates as well. And it can also impact us quite a bit too. The health of rivers and macroinvertebrates or fish are a huge concern for a lot of this stuff, but it also impacts our swimming, our fishing, hiking and camping. It can impact our drinking water. And so we want to make sure that we have clean water so us and all of our future generations can think about all these really wonderful resources that we have. So we want to tell you all about a few things that you can do at home to at least reduce some of the big three that you see of pollutants, the sediment, nutrients, and pathogens. And I'm going to turn it over to Will real quick to start us off on some things you can implement at home, some best management practices. Will?
Hey, thanks, Gray. I appreciate it. Yes, thank you for the very thorough introduction. Yeah, so great. I can't control the screen, I don't believe, so.
Okay, just tell me next slide.
I'll just get you to go next for me. So yeah, if you don't mind, go ahead and go into the next slide for me. I'll go ahead and begin. So yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit what we can do at home, and I'm going to showcase kind of a couple of our projects and kind of show how we've implemented kind of some of the strategies or implemented some strategies to kind of combat some of the issues that Gray has talked about. So the first type of project, and these have gotten very widespread, you'll see these all around urban areas, you know, in particular Nashville for sure, you see a lot of these, but there are bioretention cells. So another word for these are rain gardens. And these are basically ways to capture stormwater runoff and sink it. So think about, you know, kind of digging a shallow depression in a turf grassed area that's receiving stormwater flow. And instead of the stormwater passing through that with this depression we've dug out, we're encouraging the water to kind of sit there and then slowly infiltrate into the water table and into the groundwater. So that's going to lessen the amount of stormwater that reaches the stream, right? So everything we're doing with this is going to be replicating nature. We're trying to get back to this natural process. So we do have a rain garden manual. It's very, very useful. Got a lot of great, I think Catherine just shared it. Thank you, Catherine. It's got a lot of great resources on it. And we're actually updating it. That'll be, I think, released at the end of the month. But this is going to have a lot of great plant resources. It's going to tell you how to prepare for a rain garden, how to determine where a rain garden should be, let you know if you need to amend your soils or anything like that. So very useful. So these rain gardens, they can absolutely be done kind of at an at-home type project, you know, kind of a smaller 100 to 200 square foot. They can totally be done that way. But if you'll look kind of at these two photos here, I kind of want to talk a little bit about a couple or this is actually one project. One project we had, it's actually very recently finished up. It's in Antioch Middle School. We took about, and you can't really tell the scale here, but we took about a quarter to a half acre parcel that was all turf grass. It was kind of a drainage swale. And you also can't tell here, but there's a maybe 4 or 5 acre parking lot that backs up to there's a lot of bus driver training done here. And so basically what we did is we wanted to implement some type of bioretention rain garden type project here. Well, I had to get creative with it. This is actually in a floodplain, so you really use your traditional bioretention techniques, right? Because if it's in the floodplain, the water is going to rise and subside. And with bioretention cells, you have these really engineered kind of porous soils that allow water infiltration. So we couldn't do that. So this is a little bit different of a project, but it's still kind of it still has the same idea behind it and really the same impact. And so what we're doing here is this would be something called like a bioswell. So luckily we didn't have to do any of this, but this stream or this parking lot was like really graded down to the center, and everything would follow that flow. And then as you kind of go along this channel here on this bottom picture, that actually dumps into Mill Creek, which is one of our most heavily impacted streams in Davidson County. A lot of issues, all of those issues that Gray talked about for sure, and even a few more, honestly. And so, oh, Gray, I think it went one ahead. There we go. Sorry. And basically, yeah, so bioswell. So we implemented a ton of native vegetation. We're slowing the stormwater here at this first little portion, allowing water to go down. If water picks up in too heavy of a flow, it can kind of make its way on down there. So this consists of several thousand native plants, you know, upwards of 60 or 70 pretty large 1.5 inch to 2 inch caliber trees. This has really made an impact on stormwater. We've seen how much this can take on, and it's pretty darn cool. So this upper picture kind of gives you more of the general kind of bird's eye look at what's going on. And so, yeah, you can see it's water running off that parking lot. It hits a kind of a vegetated swale, and then it's then stopped by something we would call a wear basket, a stone wear basket, or like a stone filter. So basically when water goes through that, it's leaving behind sediment, it's leaving behind trash and stuff like that. And so we've got 2 of those kind of check dam type things. So really cool project, kind of a different look at bioretention in rain gardens, but still super applicable. So let's go to the next slide, Gray, and we'll talk a little bit about more at-home rain gardens. So these images are actually from our rain garden manual, just super straight to the point, right? So if I were looking at my property, if I wanted to know where to put a rain garden on my property, and by the way, I'll go ahead and plug, we do, if you're in Davidson County, we do rain garden consultations. It's a little different in the COVID world, but we will come out. We'll let you know kind of if your property would work for this, and then we can actually provide some native plants. So definitely, if you're in Davidson County, take advantage of that. But yeah, so if I'm on my property, I want to do something to lessen the amount of stormwater, rain garden would be great to do. So the first thing I would do is I would check out my property when it's raining. So what is the precipitation doing? I want to try to capture stormwater in an area that stormwater is actually flowing, right? And I also, sometimes you'll see people kind of changing the hydrology of their yards and stuff like that, you know, changing the flow of the water. You really don't want to encourage water towards the foundation or something like that. So I try to stay kind of in the flow. That way, if this thing does overflow, and they will overflow, you have to build them to overflow, that it's going to overflow in the kind of in the same path it was already taking. So I would read the flow. I would then kind of look and see if I have anywhere that's kind of low lying. Not too low lying. If it's too low lying, it can hold water too long and breed mosquitoes, but somewhere that's kind of along that flow and that I can actually, actually capture stormwater. So you wouldn't want to go on too heavy of a slope, and we do have more info on this in the rain garden, but you don't want to go too heavy of a slope because then you would really have to build up that back end and it would be tough. But actually what this picture depicts, and in most urban settings, this is a really good idea. Just point your downspout directly towards it, right? You've got this big roof, you've got this big impervious surface that's shedding stormwater. So why not go ahead and, yeah, so there's a box, I don't know about the box on the screen, sorry about that. Yeah, so you could direct your downspout directly to that. Just go ahead and capture it there. You know, you've got several square feet of impervious surface, so that would be a nice and easy way to capture stormwater runoff. So again, I'll plug our rain garden manual a little bit more. For sure, check that out. It's going to tell you how to build this berm right here. These things are really, really important. That's going to help hold the stormwater in, and it'll have a little bit more details, and it'll have ways to reach out to us as well. All right, so great. If we can do the next slide, if you don't mind. And this is a really, really cool project. So this directly combats impervious surface, what Gray was talking about. And this is a project that I lead, so I'm super excited about it. But it's called Depave. And the title is basically what it is. We're removing asphalt, concrete, other impervious surfaces. So this usually is in the form of a parking lot with too many parking lot cells. Sometimes, you could do this in like a patio that, when you want an outdoor classroom, or, maybe along a driveway that you're trying to take out some particular asphalt or something like that. But basically the idea is removing impervious surface, right? Removing hard surface, and then replacing that with something else. And so we like to do rain gardens, bioretention, kind of the things we talked about earlier. But what I really like about this is not only, if you do it that way, if you put some type of stormwater feature within this, you're not only removing hard surface, but you're creating something like even more than turf grass, right? So it's kind of compounding your results and really making a heavier impact on stormwater. So I think I have maybe one or two more slides, Greg. Perfect. Yeah. So what else could you do? Let's say you have a stream in your backyard. A lot of people in Davidson County do. There are a lot of small streams within the city. Something people really like to do is they like to mow directly to their stream. I think it's probably at the upper right corner. You can kind of see what's going on. I think it's a lot of times they think it's a better aesthetic, but this can do harm. If you think back to the slide we saw of the root depth of things, that turf grass is not deep at all. Compare that to some of these other native vegetations. They're really going to do a whole lot better job of holding the bank into place, right? So if you have this shallow turf grass, it doesn't take much to undercut that bank and really peel it off. If you have native vegetation, in particular trees, canopy level trees, you can really hard armor and protect your bank. So allowing something we call a riparian zone, right? So that would be the zone of vegetation along your stream. So what we like to say is create a no-mow zone. This is really at the homeowner's discretion, but I would really recommend at least 20 yards or so. The more the better, honestly. And this is going to really help transition kind of from the terrestrial to the aquatic habitat. Your stream's going to like it. The animals are going to like it. Those little critters Gray were showing, they're really going to like it too. So not everyone has a stream, but if you do, that's absolutely something you could do to improve. And lastly, and I'll let Gray expand on this one a little bit more. I believe it's the next slide, Gray. But native vegetation, nativizing your yard. There's some really good representations of this. There are a few in Davidson County, but I saw a ton of these in Portland, Oregon. And I think Gray will actually have some photos that'll better represent that. But just instead of having turf grass, have some type of native alternative, right? It doesn't have to be your whole yard, but you could kind of think of it as an alternative to traditional landscaping. Just really getting some deeply rooted native things in there, perennials, right? They're going to keep coming back year after year. And if done on a mass scale, that can absolutely improve stormwater and retention. So thanks, Gray. I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know if y'all saw a little box that popped up. I couldn't figure out what that was, but I think we're back to normal right here. So real quick. So native lawns are something that I've always really wanted to do. I think they're really fun. And I just really hate turf grass. But, I understand some people really like the aesthetic. And if we're talking about native lawns, you don't necessarily have to do what they did over here on the left. You can reduce the area, this turf area that you have. So you still have a little bit of it, but you have more garden space dedicated to native native plants that kind of promote that biodiversity and wildlife. Native lawns and native yards typically consume less water, and they're a little bit more drought resistant. I mean, these plants have been developing alongside each other for a millennia. They're used to the climate, they're used to the drought, they're used to the heavy rain that we get. They're more pest and disease resistant because they've also been just kind of evolving alongside all of these pests and diseases as well. So you don't have to fight against nature to keep these plants alive. You kind of work with nature just because you're using plants that like to be here already. And it can help all the wildlife kind of around you as well. So if you like seeing a lot of different pollinators, butterflies, bees, but other types of pollinators too that we really want to see in an ecosystem, doing a native yard can be very, very helpful. And There's a couple of ways you can do it. If you really like the lawn look, you can really go all out and remove all of your invasive grass with like a sod stripper or by smothering it, and you can replace it with native grasses. I have to kind of say off the bat, kind of like adjust your expectations, just because those native grasses aren't going to grow quite the same as like a Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass isn't from here. It's not from Kentucky. It's not from North America. It's from Europe. But it does make that really nice kind of flat lawn look. So there are some other substitutions you can do, but you just kind of have to adjust your expectations a little bit for that. And they take a little bit of time to establish too. But once you do get them established, they can look really great. You can find pictures of like a native lawn online, and they look phenomenal. You can also, if you don't want to kill off your entire yard for a whole year while you're trying to get it established, you can shrink the size of your turf a little bit too, which means less mowing and more habitat. You find a space that you can live without and convert it to a garden bed, and install some native species. I always like to say more vertical diversity makes more diverse habitat. So consider putting in maybe a native tree like a redbud or dogwood, something really pretty like that. And you can also plant these garden beds underneath them too, and just pick plants that would do well with that soil and with that shade. And Catherine, if you wouldn't mind sharing it, there's a list of native plants that was put together by the Tennessee Agricultural Extension that you can find. It's got all the common names and the scientifics, so I found that really helpful just because I tend to remember common names a little bit more. So yeah, Catherine, if you wouldn't mind sharing that link. There's also a program that the UTA Agricultural Extension has as well called Tennessee Smart Yards, and they actually have a workbook and a ton of videos on how to convert your yard to a native yard too. So Catherine, if you wouldn't mind sharing not only the workbook, but also the how-to video link as well.
Yep.
They walk you through
those all shared in there for you guys, and we'll email them out afterwards as well if you want to take a look later on.
And you don't have to do it all at once. I always want to jump in and just rip everything up and do the whole thing all at once. But if you just want to take it step by step, you can do a small corner of your yard and see if you like it. We have a blog as well that has our 5 top native plants that you can put in your yard that are pretty hardy and resilient. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that one as well. And when in doubt on what type of plants you want to use, you can always consult with your agricultural extension office, a master gardener program, or we actually have a ton of native plant nurseries around here as well. If you just Google native plant nursery, there are several in the area that do a great job, are very educational, and can help you pick a plant that would work well. But I say if you want to do a native yard, the most important things you want to do are to create a plan. So mark where, what types of yard get more or less sun. Mark your shady spots, mark your part sun, mark your full sun. Mark what parts of your yard get more or less water. You may be able to do a rain garden in one part of your yard and just do a native yard in another part of your yard. Kind of check out the soil types you have and see if you need to do any amendments. You can actually get your soil tested through the agricultural extension as well. I think it costs a little bit, and they have all that on their website. But it can be great because it can tell you if you do need to amend your soil or if you do need to add any fertilizer or anything like that. And it can help save you some money in the long run if it turns out that your soil is great. Consider how you want to utilize your yard. If you're really wanting to do a native yard, think about if you entertain a lot, if you want to have a fire pit, if you have kids, if they want to have like a flat place where they can play soccer. If you really just want to like kind of shade out all your neighbors and not look at them like I do, you can turn the whole thing into a kind of mid-canopy, taller plants to kind of block them out so you can just see the bees and the butterflies instead of your neighbors. And also a big thing is to consider the size of the mature plants and not how big they are when you plant them. So when you're developing this plan, you want to think about how big they're going to be and not how big they are when you get them. A lot of people tend to want to overplant an area, and then later on they're just trying to shave all their plants down to the size they want them to be. But a lot of these plants have a general size that they're going to end up being. And if you kind of consider that ahead of time, you can really cut back on the amount of maintenance you'll need to do on having to like trim them and prune them and things like that. In Nashville, I will say there are stipulations on what a native yard can look like. As you can see here, we've got a lot of really beautiful different types of yards as well. And you can do a lot of different things, but in Nashville, I think there's a few regulations on how close your yard can be to the street or the neighbor. I think it's a 10-foot rule. I think you'll have to consult with codes on that as well. But they do encourage it because it does have a lot of really good stormwater abatement benefits. And also just talk to us if you are considering a native yard, especially if you're in Davidson County. We'd like to try to help some people get these implemented at some point, at least if it's not just providing resources to get it done, to help you find some plants that work for you too as well. I will share our emails at the end of this presentation so you can write those down and email us if you'd like to. And another thing, I think I kind of mentioned a little bit, but even just if you don't want to do a whole native yard, just planting trees can reduce a lot of stormwater coming off of your lawn as well, just because trees utilize a lot of water. In addition, they can reduce the urban heat island effect. Urban areas tend to be really hot because they got tons of concrete and metal that just have a lot of, they retain heat really well. So planting trees can help with that. They can also help with, stress and anxiety, just having a more green environment. There have been some really good studies done on the benefits of having a more green space. So if you're ever interested in planting trees, feel free to reach out. Will is a tree guru. We also have on staff Meg Morgan. She's really great with the Root Nashville campaign, trying to get our tree canopy improved in Nashville. We're always trying to connect people with trees. Maybe it can maybe connect on with you too. So always feel free to reach out to us if you're looking to plant some type of tree as well. Another thing that's really easy to do is just downspout disconnection. If you don't have a lot of resources or time at your hand to really put a native yard together or something like that, you can buy a flexi tube at Home Depot for like 10 bucks, and you can direct your downspout that may be falling on your driveway and going straight into the storm drain, and instead direct it into your yard. And even though turf grasses don't do as good of a job infiltrating water, it's still better than it hitting the pavement and then going straight into the storm drain. The only thing I'll caution with this is, don't direct it right down into the foundation of your house. Try to make sure that you do give a little space foundation so you don't introduce a lot of water into it. But if you just redivert that downspout into your yard, you can end up saving a lot of stormwater from going into the storm drain. And last but not least, rain barrels. This is my favorite one. I have been managing the rain barrel program at the Cumberland River Compact for a couple of years, and we still do sell them. We're actually trying to sell out the last of our stock. So if you're interested in buying one for $40, please reach out to me. I'd like to get these last ones cleaned out real quick because they've been needing a good home to go to. You can do them at home really easily too as well. You can build your own, or you can get them from Home Depot or Lowe's. I don't know if any of the ones around here just have them in stock, but you may be able to order them online or just call them ahead of time to see if they have them in stock. Metro Water does a rain barrel sale. They've done one a past couple of years. They do the really nice IV barrels that look really nice. And if you're a Nashville resident, they're like $50-something, which is pretty good price for a rain barrel. I have to say, rain barrel, I get this question all the time. Please just use your rain barrel for a garden use. They're not potable water. They're not for drinking or bathing. That's because you can have bird refuse on your roof that introduce bacteria. They can also introduce heavy metals from your roof tiles and things like that. So please, if you're considering using a rain barrel, just use it for your garden use. You can also, if you want to save water, and use it for your garden, or you can also buy a soaker hose and hook it up to it and just kind of have that water slowly drain out after a big rain event. And we have some installation videos. Catherine, if you'll share it, it's once you get it home, they're pretty easy to install. The main thing is you want to make sure they have a nice solid level foundation. Rain barrels can weigh about 450 pounds once they fill up. And you want to elevate a little bit so you can get some water pressure. And we also, there's some great resources to build one as well. Catherine, if you'll share all the links here about rain barrels. There's a great do-it-yourself kit you can order from rainbrothers.com. It comes with everything you need, even the drill bits you need to put it together. There's a ton of videos out there, like there's one from This Old House. And there's even one, a great PDF that Catherine's going to share that walks you through how to make one for like $40. And it's actually really close to how we make them. And it's really easy and really easy to do it yourself. Things you want to make sure you have if you want to build one yourself is make sure you have a good place to install it. You want to secure a good food grade barrel. You really want to make sure it's food grade if you're going to be using it on your lawn. And because you don't know what's going to be in these beforehand. So the easiest way to tell if it's food grade is it'll have a stamp on it that marks it as food grade, or if it previously held food, like we use ours from Coca-Cola, then they contain Coca-Cola syrup, which has to be food grade by law. And they're usually typically #2 plastic, that HDPE. And the only tools you really need at home is a drill, maybe a saw blade, or like a hacksaw or a pole saw. And you can get the other parts to make your rain barrel at home from Home Depot or Lowe's. So you can just purchase a couple cinder blocks to kind of prop it up on, the hose bib, overflow valve, and that you'll need to put it together as well. And if you watch those videos, they'll kind of tell you how to utilize those as well. And you can also purchase a diverter as well to hook it up to your downspout. I built a rain barrel and installed it at my house. And what I did is I just kind of hacked off the downspout after measuring how high I wanted my rain barrel to be. And I bought a flexi diverter from Home Depot and just directed it into my barrel. But there's a bunch of other different systems out there too that you can find. My favorite is the one on the very far left. It just takes a little circular drill bit that you drill into the side of your downspout, and you insert a little rubber gasket in there. And what happens is once you hook it up to your rain barrel, the rain barrel, once it fills up, will allow the downspout to kind of function normally how it would. But when the rain barrel is not full, it'll siphon off that water and pull it until it fills up, and then you can utilize it over the next few weeks for your garden. And the big thing to remember about maintenance is during the winter time, you'll want to empty them out, potentially flip them over if you want to, because I've seen these things freeze solid before and water expands, and always get calls about people's rain barrels who crack. Mine surprisingly froze solid and expanded and survived, but more often than not, they're going to crack if you don't empty them out during the winter time. And so finally, if you have any questions about rain barrels, please feel free to email me. I think they're awesome, and I love sharing resources about them. I love hooking people up with either information how to do it themselves or where to purchase one. There's other things you can do at home too that we haven't mentioned yet. Pretty easy to think about, but just be conscious about washing this into your storm drain. If you're washing your car, either consider doing it at a commercial car wash or wash it in your yard and to prevent everything from washing into the storm drain. Recycle your oil and antifreeze and make sure you put something down to prevent that stuff from spilling it. I know I have to put something down every time I fill up my reserve tank for my antifreeze just because I'm a klutz and I spill it everywhere. If you're on a septic system, please make sure you're maintaining it. Pick up your pet poop. That's a big one that's easy to do, that can have a big impact if you want to do that. And also consider if you take a daily walk. I love walking every day, especially during coronavirus times, just picking up trash while I go out on my walk. If you see a storm drain, check it for bottles and plastic bags and other things that may be washing into it, because so much litter ends up in our waterways. And it's really sad because we see that in our streams later on when we're kayaking and fishing and things like that. And throw away your cigarette butts. Cigarette butts are made out of a plastic, I think it's cellulose acetate. It doesn't break down. It takes years for it to actually degrade. It doesn't biodegrade, it just breaks into smaller pieces. So consider keeping those butts and throwing them away, or keeping a pocket ashtray or something like that. That's all I have. I guess we can go to questions now, if anybody has any.
Hey, Gray, we got a question from Facebook, so I'll give you that one. This is from Rob, and you mentioned it a little bit when you were talking about native lawns, but he asked if there are zoning concerns for not mowing your yard. Do you have any other information about that?
So if you're not mowing your yard, that could be something you could go to Nashville Codes about. I attended a presentation at the West Precinct where a guy from the Codes Department talked a little bit about that. So if you have a concern for that and it looks like it's not a native kind of area, I always, of course, encourage people to talk to their neighbors and kind of figure out how to help them with that. Maybe they don't have the resources to get a lawnmower or something like that. But if it is a concern and a health concern, it's something you can contact Codes Department about.
Hey, Gray, this is Mikhail. I just wanted to say that if somebody is interested in helping us address codes to allow for conservation yards, we're talking with Metro about it. And, you know, we're not the ACLU, but we would love to have a test case to take to through the Metro codes guidelines. And we think we'd have Metro Water on our side. So yeah, if you're interested in doing that, please reach out to us.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Great, thank you. That was the only question we got from Facebook. I didn't see any other questions in the chat that came through, but if anybody does have a question and they would want to either add it into the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask, this is your time. Okay. We will be sending out the links again. So if you missed a link or you want to dive into a lot of the information afterwards, we can send that out to you. So you have all this information. Then of course, on this last page here, like Ray mentioned, our social media and our website as well is a great place for more information. All right, well, it is just about 7. So if we don't have any other questions, we're happy to stay on, but we'll probably end our recording in our Facebook live stream here. And thank everybody for coming out tonight and learning alongside us.
Thank you, everybody.